investigate allegations of maladministration and corruption relating to implementation of Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery, what is commonly known as the MBCHP program. Together with our sister organization, the South African Human Rights Commission, in an attempt to deal with the issue of access to institutions of higher learning, have been visiting universities across the country, holding talks with all the relevant stakeholders to seek a long-lasting solution to the funding challenges that seem to rock our institution of higher learning at the beginning of every academic year. We are hopeful that our intervention will bear fruit, which future generations will enjoy. I'm optimistic that this webinar will also contribute meaningfully towards achieving that goal. It is against this background that we have convened this virtual dialogue, and to enrich the quality of the discussion, we have assembled a panel whose members are drawn from various institutions in and outside government, with a role to play on matters related to higher education and human rights. At this moment, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce my panel to you and thank them immensely for availing themselves to be here today with us and to participate and to share with us their views and their stories from their different institutions. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the Public Protector of South Africa, Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane, and then introduce our Deputy Public Protector, Advocate Kholeka Gcaleka. These are my principals, and we are both welcome principals. We are also joined in this important discussion by the chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, Professor Bongani Majola. Professor Majola has been the chairperson since 2017. You're welcome, Professor. We are also joined by the Department of Higher Education and Training's Acting Director General, Deputy Director General of University Education, Dr. Thandi Lewin. Her responsibilities also include student funding policy, oversight of NSFAS, student development and support matters. So she is really a relevant person to have on this platform today. We're also joined by the CEO of the institution responsible for funding higher institutions, which is the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, commonly known as NSFAS, Mr. Andile Nongoko. Mr. Nongoko apparently was once a beneficiary of government financial aid when he was a struggling student. You're welcome, Mr. Nongoko. We are also joined by the Secretary General of the South African Union of Students, Mr. Lukhanyo Daweti. We decided to invite the representative of students in the form of a union so that we can also get a view from their perspective in terms of what are the challenges and possibly solutions that they want to put forward to government in terms of how to resolve the funding challenges. You're welcome, Mr. Daweti. And lastly, but not least, we are joined by Dr. Linda Meyer, who's the current head of operations and sector support at the University of South Africa. Dr. Meyer apparently is responsible for donor funding in excess of the many zeros, 570 million rands that he has been administering or managing over the past financial year. And all this money is the money that's geared towards funding poor students. My esteemed panelists, you are all welcome, and I hope we will get as much as possible from yourselves, because we know you come with a wealth of experience in this process. Without further ado, I just want to lay the foundation, ladies and gentlemen. In terms of the running order, we're going to start with the address or the purpose. The Public Protector of South Africa will give us the purpose of this event, just to set the tone for the discussions, and then we will move then to the facilitated dialogue amongst the panelists. And each panelist is going to be given 10 minutes to provide their input, but I will call in panelists as their time comes to provide an input, and then ultimately we'll have the Deputy Public Protector, Advocate Gcaleka, wrapping up with a summary of discussions and giving us a way forward for today. Just for other participants, it is for you to note that these proceedings are live on YouTube. We therefore invite you as our viewers to be part of the discussions and interact with us by way of questions or remarks and comments on the comment section of the media. We will also do our best to add them. We also encourage the participants on this platform to use the chat box to share their perspectives, either be questions or comments, which we will try, time allowing, to share with everybody. So at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to hand over to Advocate Mkhwebane to just share with us the purpose of the event. Advocate Mkhwebane, over to you.
Thank you so much, Program Director, for the opening, and it will make my opening very short. You've covered some of the issues. The Chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, Professor Majola, Deputy Public Protector, Advocate Gcaleka, Chief Executive of NSFAS, Mr. Nongogo, Acting DDG, University Education Department of Higher Education and Training, Dr. Lewin, Director Operations and Sector Support, Universities South Africa, Dr. Linda Meyer, Secretary General, South African Union of Students, Mr. Daweti, students from across various universities and TVET colleges, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to thank you for all for having made time to join us for this pertinent dialogue. We do not take your effort in this regard lightly. It says to us you want to help us find solutions to the challenges facing higher education sector just as much as we do. Scenes of burning tires and violent confrontations between angry students, lamenting difficulties such as financial exclusion and armed campus security or police have become a regular feature on the South African higher education calendar. We have become accustomed to the reality that at the beginning of each academic year, we'll be greeted by such dreadful and undesirable scenes on our television screens and on newspaper pages. Is it not ironic that the young people of 1976, whom we honor and celebrate annually in this month of June, as we are doing now, also found themselves in a violent confrontation with the authorities over the issues of learning? This begs more questions, which I think the program director mentioned, our CEO. Why are things like this so many years down the line and in a democratic dispensation? Why must students fight so hard to access further education when education is a right? What is it that we are not doing right as society, as government, and as accountability institutions to assist the students? Have we not overcompromised and underdelivered? In fact, overpromised and underdelivered. These questions and more spring to mind each time we see that much violence on the media platforms. Ideally, students should register seamlessly at the start of each academic year and get into lecture halls as soon as university terms commence. But as we know, it has been like this for years. Things have gotten so bad that students have even had to take matters into their own hands. Early in the year, I was approached by students who asked me to take part in and endorse their crowdfunding initiative so as to help those of their counterparts who faced exclusion on the grounds that they owe Wits University tuition. This was days before an innocent bystander, Mr. Mtumba, was shot and killed, allegedly by the police during a protest action by students from the same university on the streets of Johannesburg. Another question comes to mind: what is exactly that students are entitled to? The program director mentioned Section 29, 1B of the Constitution, which provides that everyone has a right to further education and which the state, through the reasonable measures, must make progressively available and accessible. The reasonable measures contemplated in the Constitution are spelled out in the NSFAS Act, which was established, which act makes possible for students to apply for a loan or bursary from NSFAS. However, NSFAS board is enjoined to put in place and conditions which are applicable to each loan or bursary. Among other things, those terms and conditions involve determining legibility and repayment of those funds. Is NSFAS doing this efficiently and effectively to help curb the claims of exclusion which lead to the flare-up of violence on campuses each year? Is the Department of Higher Education, Science and Innovation assisting? Interestingly, is innovation. Are we using the very same innovative ways of dealing with these challenges, and especially in the value chain? First, I wish to thank briefly as we feed the puzzle as the public protector, which the chairperson has mentioned, or the program director mentioned, our powers and our additional powers. And I will also mention that in 2020, we received around 8 complaints concerning NSFAS, and the complaints related to inadequate allowances for study material, non-payment of living allowances, and failure to pay tuition fees. I mean, horrendous stories. We hear students sleeping in toilets, sleeping and not having food, begging for food. What are we creating in South Africa? We also have an ongoing investigation stemming from allegations that NSFAS incurred irregular expenditure amounting to 7 billion, failed to assist students in that it lacked the ability to raise and recover loans, lacked ability to disperse correct amounts of money, delayed disbursements to students, its senior managers lacked formal qualifications. So those are the allegations which we will be investigating. So we held several meetings with NSFAS in 2020 to address the challenges faced by students, including failure or undue delay to settle outstanding fees, failure or undue delay to pay the monthly allowance, failure or undue delay to pay living allowances, and failure or undue delay to pay student materials allowances. It is apparent that these challenges remain. As a continuation of that work, the Deputy Public Protector, Advocate Gcaleka, this year embarked on a tour of about 7 institutions of higher learning in many provinces, namely Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Northwest Free State, Eastern Cape, Gauteng, and KwaZulu-Natal, accompanied by the South African Human Rights Commission. And we thank Professor Majola that your team and our teams are working together so that we can make sure that this country is democracy is supported and the state institutions. So they've engaged management, SRCs, and local NSFAS offices, among others, other interested parties. So the Deputy Public Protector will at the end tell us about her experiences in those when she's wrapping up, where she engaged the Minister of Education with the Human Rights Commission, Dr. Nzimande, engaged NSFAS CEO, Mr. Nongongo, as part of a multi-pronged mediation effort aimed at finding lasting solutions to the challenges of the students. She further engaged SAUS, which is the South African Union of Students, and the South African Universities Vice Chancellors Association. All this was a joint effort between the Public Protector and Human Rights Commission to help the parties find each other and resolve on lasting solutions. As you know, the Public Protector has the mandate of mediation, which is an alternative dispute resolution. Most of the time, that's a preferable means to bring parties together and resolve the matter speedily. So Advocate Gcaleka will share with us how all that is going on, and suppose the process will, in the end, tell us if financial aid of students by government is pie in the sky, and if so, what the solution is, and if not, where do we fall, do the fault lines lie, and how do we remedy them? These and related matters are what has brought us here today as part of that ongoing work, spearheaded by Advocate Gcaleka, the Deputy Public Protector. I look forward to hearing from all the other speakers here as we try to answer these difficult questions. The challenges facing the higher education sector can only be overcome through joint efforts such as this one. We also invited the South African Police Services, and I hope they will join us. If not, we will further engage, especially the challenges faced by students who are accommodated outside of campuses. How can they be supported? How can they be protected? Thank you so much, Program Director. I've taken 7 minutes of your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Mkhwebane, the Public Protector of South Africa. And indeed, your office has a responsibility to protect the right to education by our students. And it's good that we're meeting here so that we can diagnose. To get a solution, we need to ask ourselves, where did we go wrong as a country? I just want to support you on that one. And because sometimes we believe that we have all the processes and the policies in place, only to realize that we do not adequately communicate, or we do not have the enablers to enable people, especially students coming from poor communities. Are they able to apply for the student funding? Or we're just hoping that they'll all have tablets and they'll be able to access our online application processes. So it's indeed an important topic, and thank you very much for your input. And I hope the panelists then that we have, primarily from the education sector, will be able to give us the answers to your questions. Then that takes us to our next speaker, our next panel member, who is Professor Majola. Professor Majola will give us his opening remarks. Prof, are you there? I'll hand over to you at this stage.
Thank you very much, Program Director. May I greet also the Public Protector and the Deputy Public Protector, and the esteemed members of the panel that the Public Protector has already introduced. I'd like to recognize them also, and I'd like to also recognize Commissioner Gaum. He is the commissioner responsible for education at the Commission. First of all, thank you very much, Public Protector, for inviting us to be part of this webinar and for organizing the webinar and for inviting such eminent panelists to speak on it. We're looking forward to the great views that they will be giving us. Thank you also for continuing to work with the South African Human Rights Commission. You have said that so much is wrong with higher education, and we agree that, and we're happy that you're going to be investigating. Now, South Africa's history has created vast socio-economic inequality, which has impacted adversely on particularly the country's youth. The contrast of the haves and the have-nots has placed great significance on tertiary education as a tool of reducing inequality and equipping students with the skills needed to contribute positively to the economy and also live a dignified life. As an overall outcome, education must be aimed at the full development of the human personality and instill a sense of dignity. It should also be aimed at enabling all persons to participate effectively in the free society. There is therefore no doubt that the protection of the right to higher education is a central component of transformation in South Africa. The right to further education is a constitutional and constitutionally entrenched right in terms of Section 29 of the Bill of Rights. However, unlike the right to basic education, this right is not immediately realizable, but conditioned on reasonable measures undertaken by the state. Further, and within the South African context, this right is linked to other rights, such as freedom of expression and the right to peaceful protest, human dignity, and the achievement of equality, among others. Equality, addressing gender-based violence, and the right to security of person on campuses remains vital. Campuses must remain a safe environment for all, particularly vulnerable groups such as persons with disabilities. The government has an international and constitutional obligation to provide equal education opportunities for all South Africans. Article 32C of the International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights provides that further education should be made equally accessible to all based on available capacity and through every appropriate means. Even with this limitation, the state has an obligation to make reasonable measures to make the right progressively available and accessible to everyone. The Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights has stated that reasonable measures means that the state, must demonstrate that the measures are deliberate, concrete, and targeted as clearly as possible towards meeting its objectives and obligations. Although the right to further education is progressively realizable, the government has indicated its intentions insofar as higher education is concerned in the National Development Plan and the White Paper on Higher Education. The National Development Plan provides that South Africa ought to provide support for higher education system by building a strong and coherent set of institutions for delivering equality education. The 2013 White Paper for Post-School Education and Training, which was set out to transform the post-school system, sets out guidelines to improve the capacity of the post-school education and training system to meet the country's needs, as well as to integrate the various components of the post-school system. Importantly, the white paper calls for the growth of student access to universities and improving success rates in these institutions, as well as introducing free education for the poor. It also suggests that the sector investigates possibilities to provide distance education programs at TVET and community colleges. In practice, however, there remains much to be desired in the tertiary education system. This has not only been highlighted by investigations by the South African Human Rights Commission and the Public Protector, but also through statistics available. Stats South Africa indicates that there has been some progress, but also points to certain shortcomings. On the positive side, between 2010 and 2017, a total of 70.8 billion in National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS funding, was granted to more than 3 million students, increasing access to NSFAS funding. Additionally, first-time enrollment at public universities increased by 82.6% from 2000 to 2011. And the absolute numbers of continuing students increased by 59.5% between 2000 and 2016. However, the statistics also indicate some barriers to accessing tertiary education in this country. Higher education doubled from 38 billion in 2012 to 79.7 billion in 2018. Only 38% of youth aged 18 to 24 were attending educational institutions, among which 22.2% were attending school, while 11.6% were attending post-school education institutions. Most concerning is the fact that among those who were not attending educational institutions, more than 51% claimed that they did not have the financial means to pay for their tuition. It is this portion of society who would require significant intervention in order for their right to further education to be realized. It is evident that the high cost of education and the levels of unemployment render this state untenable. With these numbers in mind, it is evident that higher education funding is insufficient, and many deserving students without other financial means continue to be excluded from the system or pay for tuition fees under great pressure for them and their families. The Commission continues to engage NSFAS on the numerous challenges that exist and impact on the realization of the right to further education. It is the hope of the Commission that funding models can be amended accordingly to ensure that students are not unduly disadvantaged, including those who form part excuse me, of the missing middle. The contentious situation painted above presented itself excuse me, recently in the EFF Student Command versus Minister of Higher Education and others matter, in which the Commission joined as an amicus. This matter concerned a directive issued by the Minister of Higher Education for the University of South Africa to reduce its first-time student intake for the year 2021. As a result, UNISA accepted only 38,000 students, shy of the anticipated 58,000 students. The Commission found this position to be inter alia an impediment to the realization of the right to further education and approached the court to be admitted as an amicus. The High Court agreed with the applicants and the position of the Commission. The court ordered that the decision by the Minister and UNISA be reviewed and set aside. The implications of these decisions are wide and far-reaching and may well shine a light on the issues presented in the recent investigation by the Public Protector South Africa. But primarily, this decision is an important first step in dealing with the many challenges and hurdles confronting South African students. The investigation by the Commission and the Public Protector have also revealed key human rights concerns, including police brutality and the use of private security. Allegations of attempts by universities to stifle student Section 17 rights to protest through unfair or irregular disciplinary measures and court actions. The funding of historically disadvantaged institutions require far more financial support in order to operate on equal footing with their counterparts. These are all key areas that the Commission is considering to further investigate and intervene. On the right to protest in terms of Section 17, the Commission supports the constitutional right of the students to assemble and protest peacefully and unarmed, to the extent that the exercise of the right does not interfere with other important rights. Here, I wish to pause and make this point quite clear that while the Commission fully supports the right of the students to protest and picket unarmed, that the Commission takes the view that such protest must be done according to the terms of the Constitution, peacefully and unarmed. And we have seen in many cases where property has been destroyed and the rights of other people have been deliberately violated. Now, this is wrong in many ways. If we destroy institutions of learning while we are there, it means we are saying that other youth that are coming behind us have no right to this right to higher education. And that is wrong. I mean, if you look also at the African Charter for Human and People's Rights, which was celebrated yesterday and today, you will find that section 27, articles 27(2) of the Charter says that the rights and freedoms of each individual shall be exercised with due regard to the rights of others, with due regard to collective security, to morality and common interest. And our common interest in South Africa is that everybody should exercise the right to further education. And by banning schools and universities and so on, we are denying the others their interest to further education. So the Commission has, on the other hand, engaged with the Office of the National Police Commissioner to discuss police brutality and violence during student protests. There is actually a request at the moment that the Commission has sent to the Commissioner for yet another meeting with regard to police brutality. And we're hoping that we will have an audience with the Police Commissioner. The Commission will be meeting with the Office of the National Police Commissioner to engage further on this. In closing, it is clear that government has such a crucial role to play in ensuring the right to further education, and that this right is respected and implemented. As institutions supporting democracy, there is no doubt that there is a role to be played by the Office of the Public Protector South Africa and the Commission and other key stakeholders to hold the state accountable to providing this right in a progressive manner. I must commend the Public Protector South Africa for the work already done to bring further attention to this integral issue. It is my hope that during the deliberations today, all stakeholders can come to a consensus on the ways in which this right can become a positive reality for more students in this country. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for those insights. I must say it is really indeed. It was very educational as well. And thank you for bringing out that point. Just to remind us, especially our students, that these rights are linked. As much as you have a right to higher education or to education, you also have a right to a peaceful demonstration, because sometimes we violate other people's rights in the process of fighting for our own rights. So that's a very important element of your topic. And I think it's something that we should bring forth as we meet with students and as we interact with different members of the communities, just to remind them that the rights are linked. Once you have your rights, other people also have rights to be respected, and they also have a right to be protected by the same state. And I just want to also agree with you on the issue of funding. Probably you should have invited, at some point, we should engage the National Treasury as this collective to get a sense of what is the future plan in terms of funding for higher education, because it seems as if it's never enough. But at the same time, I also want to support you on the issue of probably funding for previously disadvantaged communities that need special attention. I think it's important to also bring that forth to the authorities, to the people who have the public purse, to say that the funding probably should link more on the people with from the poor communities, previously disadvantaged communities, because those are the people who are hit hard. And those are the students who struggle to access higher education. But thank you very much for your input and for sharing this information with us. I think it was very critical. Without any waste of time, I would like us to move over to Dr. Lewin. Dr. Lewin will be sharing with us her views, and she'll be talking primarily on the issues of the funding models that they've considered, the different funding options that are available to support students, and how they're dealing with the so-called missing middle income bracket. And unfortunately, Dr. Lewin is going to leave us immediately after her presentation because she's got to join other session. So we'll see how much time or of her time can we steal further than that. And Dr. Lewin, may I hand over to you to take us through your process before you leave us?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to the Public Protector and the DPP, as well as the Chair of the Human Rights Commission. I also greet the new President and SG of SAUS, who've just been elected at the elective Congress this weekend, and to my colleagues, Dr. Meyer and Mr. Nongogo. Thanks very much for organizing this session, and sincere apologies for not being able to stay. I think the discussion is going to be extremely interesting, and hopefully we can have further discussions and hopefully support the suggestion also to engage with National Treasury at some stage, given the very, very difficult decisions that National Treasury is forced to make about balancing our requirements as a country, our social and economic needs, given the tight fiscal situation at the moment. In terms of the presentation, I had wanted to open, in fact, with a discussion around the policy framework, but this has been really quite adequately referred to by both the Public Protector in her input as well as the Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission. So I don't think I need to repeat on that. But it is an important backdrop to the work that government does in order to support students. And maybe what I'm going to just really do is outline some of the issues that face us in the current situation and try to do this as quickly as possible, leave a little bit of time for questions. Essentially, government policy has been consistent over many, many years in focusing on supporting access to higher education for students from poor backgrounds. That is, the high-level policy has been to support students who deserve to access higher education and training but cannot afford to do so, to access higher education and to succeed, particularly in first undergraduate qualifications. This has really been the consistent approach of government, and I'll show you the budgets, how the budgets have grown over time. What is also clear is that there's a lot of evidence that we have that this actually works. So we have cohort studies that show us that NSFAS recipients are actually doing very well overall, as much as there are sometimes public discourses that present a different picture. In actual fact, it's quite a positive picture. However, the situation currently is that despite the huge growth in government funding, and it has been substantial, funding is still not adequate to address all the funding needs that exist in our higher education sector. So although students in the lowest income categories are supported and now currently supported through fully subsidized funding, there are still many students who struggle to access higher education and training and who deserve support. There is also extremely limited funding for postgraduate students, and these are some of the issues we're facing currently. The other issue is that student debt in the system has continued to grow despite the growth in government funding, and now the debt currently sits at approximately 14 billion rand. Those are 2019 figures from the statements of the universities. We are doing further debt analysis at the moment as part of the policy review process. And what it means is that universities are losing income from tuition fees as much of this debt is written off. The funding has increased exponentially to higher education and training from a 6 billion allocation to NSFAS in 2014-15. We now have an allocation in the last financial year of 35 billion, and you will know that this year's allocation has grown to 41.5 billion. That's the 2021 to 22 financial year, and that includes the additional funds that have been reprioritized from inside the department, from the university and TVET funds, as well as from the National Skills Fund, in order to support the shortfall at NSFAS. That 41.5 billion comes close to matching the 43 billion subsidy budget of the subsidy that goes to the university system. Other thing to note is that most initiatives have been ad hoc, as much as we've addressed enormous increases in student funding over the years. And you can see this growth. Of course, the biggest growth was from 2018 onwards. But what we have done is increased funding to support some students, but we haven't addressed the need for a comprehensive student financial aid system. And this has been well referred to in previous inputs today. And what we need to do is to try and find some kind of a universal or comprehensive funding scheme going forward so that we're able to address all of these issues that include addressing student debt, addressing funding for the missing middle students who are essentially holding much of that debt, and also, of course, addressing the funding needs of the system, because at the current time, we can't continue to erode the funding that needs to go into the system to support the effectiveness of our institutions and the quality of the education being provided in order to support the costs of student fees. Essentially, what has also happened over the past 2 years is that the demand for funding support through the NSFAS bursary has actually exceeded the available funds. And this came to a head last year when NSFAS depleted its reserves, and also when there was an extended academic year, and because of COVID, and we had to cover some of those costs through the NSFAS budget. There was also meant that there was no upfront funding available for 2021, and this means that NSFAS had to work very closely with institutions, and it did affect the academic year start, although kind of ironically, in a way, the academic year was already delayed because of the extended 2020 academic year, and therefore that problem wasn't as acute as it may have been in previous years had upfront funding from NSFAS not been available. We are anticipating a significant demand increase this year, given the effects of COVID-19 on the economy and on family income. Unfortunately, the final figures are not available at this current time. Maybe just also to indicate that the original modeling that was done for this current bursary scheme that has been phased in since 2018 was done on the assumption that the proportion of qualifying students would be approximately 40%. That was based on information available at the time. In actual fact, the demand has been far higher than that, and we looking at between 50 and 60% of undergraduate students being supported last year. That figure may grow this year. We also have a situation where students are coming back into the system who had previously been in the system but had been unable to fund their studies. And I've mentioned the concern about the system funding. Maybe also just to say that we are seeing increasing reliance of universities on state subsidy and a decrease in fee income. And so you got on average well over 40% of university income is reliant on the state subsidy. And so we have a really difficult and quite delicate situation at the moment where we need to balance the high level policies of government, both to grow and expand and develop the higher education and training system in terms of the National Development Plan, in terms of the white paper on post-school education and training, but also to provide the kind of transformational support that is provided through student funding policy. Just in terms of missing middle, to give you just a very quick sense of the issues there, the debt profile of students is something that we are trying to understand much better now as part of this policy review that is underway. The current estimates around the numbers of students it's quite an unknown figure. The ministerial task team that was appointed by the minister in 2016 estimated the figure to be approximately 20%. Through our own data in supplying support to students for the fee adjustment gap grant, which was offered for the first time in 2017, approximately 16% of students were seen to be missing middle. However, we are doing better analysis on that. Just in terms of missing middle, the real concern, of course, is that despite a lot of work that's been done, and of course, significant recommendations over time from, for example, the Heha Commission, which completed its work in 2017, as well as work that was done looking at missing middle and funding for students from poor and working class backgrounds in 2016. We need to explore some of those funding models that have been outlined in the past, taking into account the current circumstances and the future requirements, as well as the high level policy of government. And that is work that we are currently underway in the policy review process that is being undertaken. And I think that I had another slide where I wanted to tell you a little bit about other initiatives, but I'm not going to do that. I just want to focus quickly on what work is currently underway. And the reason I can't report on it is because we haven't yet reported to Cabinet on this work. And we are going to the next Cabinet meeting on this to outline the work that's being done. Is being done by the department in consultation with National Treasury, as well as with the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, to outline the current status of government financial support to students from poor and working class backgrounds, and to outline the current funding challenges, which are relatively well known in the public domain, and to review work, as I've indicated, that we've already done in order to outline possible policy options for student funding. We need to identify long-term policy change proposals that would ensure a fair and sustainable policy in the long term, and one that is most closely aligned to the high-level policy goals of government, as well as taking into account the universal or comprehensive funding needs of the system. We are going to be making short-term recommendations on possible changes in the next month to Cabinet, and from then we will be continuing with modeling work that needs to be done to model the costs of the different options, which ultimately have to be presented as part of the medium-term budget process. And as you know, the medium-term budget policy statement comes out in October. In the long term, we want to identify not just a policy model that works, but also appropriate and sustainable funding sources for a comprehensive or universal student funding model. The Minister has appointed a ministerial task team that is looking at this, working with the TVET and university sector. The task team is chaired by Professor Mtose, who's the Vice Chancellor of the University of Zululand. That work has been quite intense over the last month or so. And at the moment, I can't provide much more of an update on that process. Maybe also to indicate that I know there was interest in the report of the Ministerial Committee of Inquiry on NSFAS. Also not in a position to share the findings yet of that review. The findings are with the Minister. The Minister has indicated that he would want to go to Cabinet and present those findings first, and hopefully that will also happen at the meeting in the next meeting of Cabinet. And from there, the Minister would then make a decision. But essentially, that Ministerial Committee of Inquiry focused very much on NSFAS itself as an entity and understanding the root causes of the problems at NSFAS and making recommendations going forward. And maybe to say also, just in conclusion, Chair, that we are extremely animated as government that whatever changes do need to take place, one of the very serious considerations needs to be given to how we phase in any new policy framework over time to ensure that we are able to support that policy framework administratively as well as financially. So, Chair, unfortunately, I know this is not the exact answers that were required, but I wanted to give you a sense of some of the work that's underway, and hopefully once we've made some initial presentation to Cabinet and there's some guidance from Cabinet, it might be possible for the Minister and the department to engage further with yourselves on some of the policy options under discussion. But at this point, the technical work is underway. Thanks very much, Chair, and for the time, and apologies that I have to leave, but if there's a couple of questions now, I'm happy to answer them, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levine, for the detailed input. And I don't see any questions on the sidebar, but I just have one question for you. As you develop all these funding models, the new funding models that you say must still go to Cabinet, do you solicit input from other stakeholders, like your interested parties, like the union that we have here, or who else do you solicit inputs from before you finalize your processes? That's the one question. The other question, you mentioned the transformational support that you're giving to students. If you can just elaborate more on that transformational support. Those are the two questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I mean, just on the first question, yes, I mean, there needs to be quite a detailed communication and engagement strategy by the ministry and the department. Once we are certain about what kinds of funding models we are looking at and what the costs might be. And the reason we can't do that now is that quite a lot of the technical work is still underway. What I can assure you is that we are looking very closely at the work that's been done in the past. So, for example, the Heha Commission, which has been referred to a lot in the debates over the last few months, literally everyone presented to the Heha Commission, and it was able to consider inputs from the whole of society, including the Department of National Treasury, but also all the stakeholders that have an interest in higher education and higher education funding. And so a critical part of the work is going back and looking at that. But certainly once we have received initial feedback from Cabinet, it is likely that we would then have to engage in some kind of a more formal communication and engagement process with the necessary stakeholders, who are, of course, as you say, the unions and the student leadership in the country. So, but we're not at that point yet. The task team will be advising the minister on that. So that's the first question. And remind me the second question. I've forgotten it already.
You mentioned the issue of the transformation
support
that you're providing to students.
Yeah.
What's that?
So, so essentially what I was doing is framing the funding policy of government within the context of the transformation of the public higher education training sector. And the kind of support that's provided in South Africa currently is not really provided anywhere else, and essentially is about ensuring that the higher education system is able to transform, that in an unequal society, if we don't provide adequate financial support for students to access higher education, it's very difficult for them to do so. And we also have evidence that the kind of funding support that is provided, which includes support for access to accommodation and the other kinds of support needs that students have in higher education, is also having a very significant effect on student success. So essentially, it's the fully subsidized funding, or at least what is referred to in previous reports on this as fee-free at the point of access, which is essentially, if you need to access higher education, you should be able to access the financial support that allows you to be able to get through a qualification and succeed and graduate with a degree. So it's essentially that I didn't have time to go into the kind of levels of support that are being provided, but you can see from the budget increases that it's extremely significant amounts of funding, and it's grown exponentially over time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewin. What I didn't mention is that Dr. Lewin committed to providing further information and clarity should it be required. So everybody is encouraged to use our social media platforms, and we will try to ask questions. We'll try to find a way in which we can channel the questions to Dr. Lewin and make sure that we post the responses there on our social media platforms. But thank you very much, Dr. Lewin. And I think we can release you at this time to enable you to connect to your next meeting. Thank you for that input. Ladies and gentlemen, can we move on then in our program after that detailed input from Dr. Lewin? Can we move on to our next panelist, who is Mr. Lukhanyo Daweti. Mr. Lukhanyo Daweti is the Secretary General of the South African Union of Students, and he'll be talking to us about their role in ensuring access to higher education and learning in a secure and safe environment. Mr. Daweti, over to you. I see Mr. Daweti says he's experiencing challenges with his connectivity, so we will probably defer his presentation to a later stage. At the moment, then we move over to Mr. Andile Nongoko. Mr. Nongoko, you can take us through your NSFAS challenges that are raised by students and the analysis of the task team report on NSFAS. Over to you, Mr. Nongoko.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning or good afternoon to all the panelists, and to also whoever to the people that are listening at home. I think, Chair, it's important for me to start with contextual background of NSFAS, that we would recall that before, the scheme was a decentralized one where institutions were the ones making funding decisions. Of course, that came with a number of challenges in the main, where there was no consistency, and also where the rules were not necessarily being applied correctly. And as such, in 2011, 2012, a decision was taken to centralize NSFAS. And this decision was started to be implemented in 2013 through a pilot project. And this was then fully implemented in 2017. And of course, while the scheme was still grappling with this new method of working, the bursary then, the scheme being a fully bursary scheme, was introduced in 2018. And of course, I'm highlighting this, Chairperson, so that we understand why we have some of the operational challenges that we have. So in other words, we had just started grappling with what we call the student-centered model, which is the centralized model. As we're trying to gear our processes to align, and our organizational structure to align to that, then the scheme became a bursary scheme, which therefore meant that it changed completely. And of course, this came with no time to review the structure, no time to review the operational policies, and even some of the funding policies. So in the main, that kind of gives context to why we have some of the challenges that we have today. And of course, these challenges were confirmed by an internal audit report that was done, which we commonly refer to as the NOCLAIR report, which really is non-compliance with rules and regulations. That, of course, meant that it found that there were inadequate controls in place in the organization. It found that we were probably not funding the right students. And of course, that led to that organization being placed under administration. Of course, then at the time when the administration started, there were students whose funding was not released. And of course, the initial phase of administration focused on that. And the second phase of administration was to stabilize the organization. Consequently, there are still a number of issues then that could not be got into during administration, namely that of reviewing the systems, because we still are operating on legacy systems, namely to align the structure to the current model of working. And of course, there are also funding policies that have not yet been adjusted, because we are still operating with some of the policies that were applicable when the scheme was a loan scheme. And of course, this is why we see some of the challenges that are being raised by the student. Of course, the funding model in itself is a challenge. Of course, I'm not going to speak to the funding model in as far as it relates to the sustainability of the scheme, because I think Dr. Lewin covered that in the main. But also, I think the way in which NSFAS as an entity is funded, meaning, in other words, our administration budget, if we are supposed to disperse or administer disbursement of about 41, 42, 43 billion, do we have enough systems and processes in place? Do we have enough funding to be able to respond to that? And of course, the issue of the admin fee or of how we are funded administratively also contributes to these challenges, because the question can be asked validly: if your systems are aging, why are you not changing them? And of course, while we know that we have to change them, you then find that you've got budgetary constraints that prevent you from doing so. Hence, we find that we've been operating on sticky tape and glue to try and keep the systems together. Of course, in terms of who is eligible for funding, because this is where there tends to also be a bit of confusion. NSFAS funds students on the basis of, there are two bases we use. It is called, we call them financial eligibility, and the second one is that of academic eligibility. Of course, financial eligibility mostly applies to students that are applying for the first time. So first-time applicants qualify for NSFAS if they come from households whose income is between 0 and 350,000. And of course, to highlight the earlier problem, I highlighted that the scheme kind of had to change in a very short notice. Students that were funded prior to, or that had entered the academic system, higher education system prior to 2017, they are assessed on a different threshold, namely that the household income must be between 0 and 122,000. Of course, that creates some challenges on its own. Of course, students who have disabilities are then household income that is looked at is between 0 and 600,000. Of course, Chair, this comes also with challenges. We know that you indicated earlier before we started this session that there seems to be a misunderstanding about who is funded. Of course, while there's misunderstanding, there are those that are not eligible for this funding, but they still want to access this funding. Let me even be bold and say fraudulently. Part of this issue is that, of course, then you have people who submit information that when we verify does not always agree. We verify household income through various platforms such as SARS, such as we also look at the Department of Home Affairs data to check whether or not the students or the applicants have listed their household properly by listing all their parents. Of course, also in this area, we're finding that, we know the South African context where about many of our people do not know both of their parents, or we've got what we call absentee parents. One of the biggest challenges and outcries we get from students is when we do this verification, we pick up that there's a parent that has not been listed by the applicant. And of course, when we do the assessment, the parent does not qualify for this funding. And of course, then the challenge we face from students is, but we do not know this parent. And the question really, it's also a question I'm opening to this platform is, does NSFAS play a role in dealing with social issues? Because according to the rule is that it's household income, and the definition of household income at the moment looks at who the parents are. So this is some of the challenges, because we also spend a great deal of time trying to verify this information back and forth with students, which ultimately also sometimes leads to the delay in making these funding decisions. Of course, we find that also people year on year revert to saying that, of course, I do not live with my parents, I live with a guardian or a grandmother. In those situations, again, that then means oftentimes people will defer to a guardian that is meeting the qualification threshold. And these are some of the challenges that we also face in assessing this eligibility of student. Of course, we know that it's very important for us, given that we are operating within physical constraints and rules are rules. What processes do we need to put in place to make sure that those that do not necessarily qualify are accessing these funds, thereby taking opportunities to those that are deserving of the scheme? The second issue we look at before we consider whether a student is funded or not is academic eligibility. Academic eligibility is currently applied to students who are returning students. We currently use progression rules where for example, for TVETs, there's a certain percentage of courses that a student has to pass before they are considered to be funded. Generally, for students that are continuing students, we apply what is called the N+ rule, meaning you are given one extra year to complete whatever qualification that you are studying towards. Of course, that also comes with its own challenges, because in essence, one of the challenges here is we look at the time when a student entered higher education, not necessarily the time when a student has been funded. And of course, the argument is that you're already subsidized in terms of your studies, whether it was when you are paying for yourself through the subsidies that the government does provide. And of course, even the N+ rule in itself, in a context of a bursary scheme, should you still be looking at the number of years a person is studying, or you should be looking at performance? Because we are also asking these questions given the fact that there's more demand to access this assistance that government is providing through NSFAS. And of course, then a student is only ultimately funded when they are registered at an institution of higher education. Now, I'm painting this picture so that, Chair, we have this understanding that, of course, if a student has to be registered, of course, that then becomes the first dependency that we have. It means we then have dependency on institutions to indicate to us who has been registered, until the point when we either, one, get the list of students that are registered, two, even the results for continuing students. There's really not much NSFAS can do up until that point. Of course, this also then highlights the issue that if NSFAS's systems were integrated to those of institutions, there would be no time lag, there would be no waiting, that information would be easily available. And of course, we've seen that in the past, some institutions also submit this registration information very late. In fact, the practice before has been that there's never been a timeline where the process of submission of registration information is closed. And of course, we also see that institutions sometimes do give us registration information that includes students students who do not qualify. And of course, then that also takes time in verifying. One of the key challenges that is facing NSFAS and also students is the issue of institutions registering students on legacy qualifications, meaning these are qualifications that would have expired. And of course, we cannot fund those qualifications that are expired. And in fact, there's even a bigger problem over and above the funding question. The question is, if those students continue to study qualifications that are no longer relevant, how are they going to find employment? Of course, Chair, I'm not saying this without trying to say that NSFAS in itself has got its own system challenges, process challenges, but there is a lot of dependency. We have a dependency on the students themselves. At the time of application, to submit accurate information, even submit all the necessary information that is required of them. At the time of funding, we were dependent on institutions to submit accurate registration data. And of course, students themselves, before they are paid allowances, particularly those that are in the TVET colleges, have to register on my NSFAS portal, which therefore allows us to pay them allowances. And we find that sometimes students do not necessarily register in these platforms that are in place. Chair, having highlighted the problems, it's important then to talk about what it is that we are doing to try and address this. At an administrative level, we are currently busy reviewing our structure to make sure that it is aligned to the new way of working. We are also embarking on systems improvements. We've started by improving the key modules that are used for NSFAS, namely those that relate to payment of students. We're improving our application portal such that we are able to make real-time decisions as and when students are applying. Of course, there will be exceptions in circumstances where students have not given us all the necessary information, or where we are still required to verify some of the information that has been presented to us by the applicants. From a policy position, and again, of course, internal systems, processes and policies. We are busy reviewing that as well. But at the student funding level, the board has looked at a number of policy issues that are affecting students, issues of appeal, issues of student accommodation, issues of the actual funding threshold that is of students, and all the other issues of progression, issues of aligning the rules to the bursary scheme. I'm deliberately, Chair, being cryptic on this because in the sector we operate in, we have to consult with various stakeholders. We still need to go through a consultation process with the department itself on some of the positions or resolutions the board has taken in this regard. Thereafter, we have to consult with the institutions themselves, and we still have to then consult with the student leadership as well, so that we make sure that these matters have gotten be consulted on properly. And we are doing this, Chair, so that these are part of the 2022 guidelines that are going to be issued. Of course, last year, the funding guidelines were issued quite late. Part of the reason for that was the fact that there were funding shortfalls. So some of the decisions could not be made pending whether or not the funds were available. Some of the issues raised by students to us is the issue of postgraduate qualifications in the main that were not funded. And the simple reason is really it was linked to fiscal constraints. Of course, these are some of the areas that are being looked at because we are quite aware that there are qualifications or professions that require students to have a postgraduate qualification before they enter into that profession. Because I think the important thing to highlight, Chair, is that NSFAS funds the first qualification. That is the principal role of NSFAS, is to fund the first qualification, so that there is more access to higher education. So that's where the issue of postgraduate qualifications was perhaps not funded this year. Of course, we admit that this should have been consulted on, and this could have also, there should have been transitional arrangements provided. But again, having said that, it's not that only this is not funded. We are working with the department to source additional funding for this through CETAs, through other government departments and the private sector. I will end it there, Chair, and then we'll take any questions that may come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nongoko, for that input. It was very, very informative. But I'm just wondering, to what extent are we communicating this information probably to the people on the ground, especially the children from the rural communities? But that will come to the questions and answers at a later stage. I see there's a number of people who have questions as well for NSFAS, but we'll come to this session at a later stage, and then we can share all the questions with you and allow you to respond. But it's just interesting that you have also identified the weaknesses in your process, which I believe is the first step towards improvement, because you first have to acknowledge that you have a problem. And once you acknowledge that you have a problem, then you stand a better chance of improving. And I really appreciate the fact that NSFAS has done that introspection and you've identified all your areas of weakness. And it's just concerning that actually you're saying it seems as if there's a disconnect between the institutions of higher learning and NSFAS, because if the institutions of higher learning still register students for discontinued programs and expect them to be funded through NSFAS, that indicates some lack of some disjuncture between the two. And I hope that when we deal with the questions and answers, you will respond to some of those issues. But thank you very much. And without any, and so to all those who want to ask questions, we are going to have a question and answer session. So keep sending your questions. And then when we come to that, we will definitely ask your questions and give the panelists an opportunity to respond. That then takes us to our next speaker. I want to believe that Mr. Lukaya Lukhanyo Daweti is back online. Mr. Daweti, can I hand over to you at this moment to give us your input?
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. You may proceed.
I do request that you don't see me when I present. I will be very short because I only became aware this morning that I will be speaking in this webinar. But I think on a high level, the South African Union of Students within the sector, primarily ours is to ensure that we intend gender acts. When we speak about transformation culture, you would know that it's a broad term because it does not only focus on numbers, but we also speak about the curriculum in itself. So basically, as the outgone 7th NSC, we took a position to say the higher education sector is to be accessible to students. And we asked ourselves, what then becomes the role of the union in ensuring that this sector is accessible to each and every student? So through the number of programs that we've done, we have also made sure that not only higher education is accessible, but all stakeholders within the sector are also accessible, because we found out, Chair, firstly, to make a simple example around the issue of NSFAS. Students who are coming from deep rural areas where the information can't really reach them. Those students don't even know that the application of NSFAS gets to be opened in July or in August or September. They only become aware of NSFAS when they enter the premises of the universities. And at that time already, the applications are closed. So we took it upon ourselves to make a road shows across 9 provinces in ensuring that we're spreading the word about the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, and ensuring that students become aware of that. We did not stop there, Chair. We also ensure that we establish a yearly campaign of the mental health program, because we have identified through the research that we've done that across the universities, the mental health was the biggest issue, particularly with students. And if you look into it, it became apparent to us that students who are suffering from such invisible phenomena get to be trapped into this around the examination time. So we ensured that all universities are establishing such facilities. And I can tell you now, out of 26 universities, about 21 universities have mental health support services in place, even online, where students can have their toll-free and all that. And we've also made sure that through Higher Health, which is headed by Professor Ramnik, we do have a toll-free numbers that can be used by the students across the country as we speak. But now the biggest challenge that we are faced with as a union, I think Dr. Thandi Lewin also spoke into it, is around the issue of the missing middle. Because the missing middle, if you are in the missing middle, it means you are rich, not to pay for your fees, but equally you are rich. What is this saying that we normally use? You are not too rich. You are not too rich to pay for your fees, but the system does not allow you to be in the point where you can be assisted. Now, we have started a conversation with the CEO of NSFAS, Mr. Nongogo, to say, how can we temper into this category? Because the reality of the matter is that it's a real concern, and there is a large number of students who are there. And I'm glad to say that I think the CEO, there is a work that he committed to start in terms of looking into that particular category. He promised to look into the SETAs and see how can he get together the heads of the CEOs of all the SETAs in terms of ensuring that how can they collaboratively look into this matter? Because if you look into the SETAs and how they fund, they use exactly the same criteria as it is being used by NSFAS. And ours, Chair, as a union, is to ensure that we try our level best to try and find all solutions, not necessarily all, but at least there must be solutions to critical problems that which are faced by the sector, because ours is to ensure that there is no student that is being left behind. Because as the national union, as you might know, Chair, yes, there are those who are affording, but ours is to be biased to those who are coming from the poor and the working class. And I must say, Chair, now, as this new leadership, we're going to take a different path. So, we have resolved that we will be lobbying all the stakeholders in the sector to ensure that there is a standardized model when it comes to student accommodation, because when you speak about access, it does not only speak about access only to universities, but we speak about access into various services when the student is in the sector. Accommodation universities are using systems that we have never seen in the sector, because if you go to WUSU and you check the level and the standard of the accommodation that is being used by such a university, it's appalling, Chair. University student that would be expected to pay around 2.5 to 3,000 for such a service. To us, it's something that is unacceptable as a union. So we're going to lobby NSFAS, we're going to lobby the DHET to ensure that there is a policy that is going to be consistent and constantly used across all universities, so that we ensure that we arrest these funny tendencies which we happen to see. Because, for instance, if you go to CUT as well, that's why the biggest crisis in terms of the accommodation that we managed to pick. So we're saying we're glad that the public protector has managed to convene a program of this nature, because as you have highlighted earlier, the role and the responsibilities of the public protector is to ensure that we as citizens are protected. So what to us, and whatever it is that is due to us from the government as point of view, we must get it sufficiently, and the services to our students, and particularly to the sector, must be satisfactory to a point where that the students must not be advantaged because of the non-delivery, or perhaps because of the challenges that the departments or all the stakeholders in the sector that they can't resolve themselves. So we want to say that, Chair, as this new leadership, we are glad that you have invited us to this webinar, and we want to commit to say that we are prepared throughout our term, and in fact, within the sector, particularly from our side, the student leaders, the victimization of student leaders, from institutions, the victimization of student leaders, from state's point of view. So we want to lobby the public protector to ensure that we lobby those forces that can be able to assist us in ensuring that those who still go to courts in relation to fees must fall court cases, the government can be convinced to ensure that the amnesty is brought up, is being given to those student leaders. Without further wasting your time, Chair, I would like to stop there, and I would accept any question that can be posed on my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jawedi. I'm going to give you time to just calm down and sort out your network, because it's a bit wobbly. But please, let's not lose you, because we are going to go to the session, and I see you, there's a number of questions addressed to you. But just to thank you for all the efforts that you're making as a union to make sure that students can access higher education, especially those in communities where accessing information might be a challenge. We really appreciate them. These are the partnerships that will take this country forward, where we all work together to find solutions to the problems. And we really appreciate your efforts working with other stakeholders to make sure that students access their services. And at that moment, and please, let's not lose you, but if you can just sort out your network connectivity, because we are going to go to the discussion in a few moments. but we still have to then get an input from our last panelist, but not least, Dr. Meyer, who's gonna talk to us about education as a tool for development, equality and poverty, and how we can use education to reduce poverty, and how do they contribute then as their institution to policy positions regarding higher education. So we're going to hand over to Dr. Meyer to provide the input, and then thereafter, we'll then go to the question and answer session, where you'll be given an opportunity then to respond to all the questions that have been forwarded to us that you must respond to. Dr. Meyer, are you with us? And over to you.
Thank you very much, CEO. I would just like to thank the Public Protector and the HSRC for making this event live, and the ability for us to also raise our voice. So Public Protector, thank you so much. It is refreshing to have a leader that is willing to listen to all sides and to find a middle ground as we face these very difficult tasks that we are faced with in the higher education sector. Chairperson, I'd like to start off and say that higher education, and I've been asked to speak about education, and I'm obviously interested in higher education as a tool for development and poverty reduction. I think there is really this perennial issue that we're dealing with annually about policy security, about the poor and missing middle students not knowing how they're going to pay for their tuition fees. And this is counterintuitive to economic growth. It is also counterintuitive to forging the place of higher education as a transformation element and the strongest catalyst for social justice within any society. So as we see annually, our students join campuses. They are unsure about their accommodation. They are faced with academic and financial exclusions, and the safety of our students are often compromised. We had a tragic event this year where students that were at a TVET college died because they were exposed for 6 days without food and being set outside. And this is simply, in this day and age, completely unacceptable. So how do we deal with these inequalities that manifest itself? And what do we speak about? Why do we say we need to invest in education as a catalyst to change? So we look at the COVID-19 period, and we see that in this emergency remote teaching and learning period, our students, often we spoke about that they didn't have devices. These debates really are moot when we think about this, because many of our students don't have electricity security. So to speak about data security is something that is far-fetched to many of our students. So how do we equalize this vast ecosystem that mirrors the inequality of the South African system? And as USAF, we obviously say that we cannot say that higher education is not an investment. This is not a cost to society, it is an investment in society. The biggest catalyst to drive economic growth is to ensure that we invest in higher education. And I point colleagues, please, to look at the Statistician General's latest Q1 report and to see what the unemployment rate is for graduates. Graduates are unemployed at a rate of 9.3%. So when we look at the youth unemployment, we see that our youth are unemployed when we look at 15 to 24 years of age. We see that they are unemployed at 63.3%, and at 25 to 34, that they are unemployed at 41.3%. And for those individuals that have less than a matric, it's 38.3%, matric 34, other tertiary institutions, so TVET qualifications, 21.2, and graduates at 9.3. So this is no longer a debate about whether this is an investment. It is a debate about where we put our money and whether we're serious about social justice, whether we're serious about social solidarity. So it is very unfortunate that NSFAS has this arbitrary cut-off date of a cut-off amount of 350,000. And Mr. Ngogo, I must say, from NSFAS has made tremendous inroads. He's a true CFO. He looks after the money, and I know he looks after it well. But there's a broader social discourse, and I hope that the public protector takes this into consideration, because to arbitrarily tell a student that they own 300, that their household has 350,001 rand, and therefore they excluded, or 351,000 and they excluded, but somebody that has 350,000 is included, is morally a very questionable stance that students understandably have difficulty with. So we know that over 65% of our students that are NSFAS beneficiary are also from SASSA households. So these are not students that come from nowhere, but what is the difference in a student getting a qualification? It doesn't just mean that their life is changed, it means that their entire family's lives are changed, and that the entire community from where they come is uplifted because there is economic activity that comes from this. Now, there are many detractors that will tell us that NSFAS is bad, it's unsustainable. And I just want to say to the public protector that in my opinion, this is absolute nonsense. For me, NSFAS is the best thing that ever came about. And education for free and missing middle students is something that was long overdue, because it is the only way in which we are going to work towards normalizing our society, where the haves are not continually and perpetually advantaged, while the have-nots are continually drawn down because of the lack of access to funding. Now, when in 2018, after President Zuma made the announcement that there would be free education for poor and missing middle students, we saw that the definition of missing middle was increased from 122,000 per annum to 350,000 per annum. And I understand that there had to be a cutoff date or a cutoff amount that had to be set. But the reality is that students that come from households of 400,000 or 500,000 have to compete with many competing interests. And higher education is extremely expensive. And we must understand that before a student puts their foot on a university, half of their tuition fees are already covered through block grants. But the important thing is to understand that we cannot just look at this issue in isolation. We see from 2010 to 2019 that government grants have stayed steady. In 2010, it was at 43%, and in 2019, it was at 48% of government grants, block grants that were given to universities. And that universities have, with tuition fees, this has stayed steady between 30 and 33% between 2010 and 2019. But the one element that has decreased, obviously, is around dividends and interest, because we have this real problem of student debt that we need to find a meaningful solution for. It is not just about the 14 billion from 2019, and the reality is it's probably closer to 16 billion that we're speaking about that students owe. It is about the interest that needs to be paid on this amount by universities, which takes away from the academic program. It takes away from infrastructure development. It takes away from appointing additional academic staff and from having very meaningful programs for students, whether it be psychological support, whether it be feeding schemes. And it is abominable that our students have food insecurity. It is simply not right in any society that we can sit back and accept this as the norm. And CEO, I just want to say, and also to the public protector, a very interesting analysis of the breakdown of government grants, tuition fees, and other income of the respective universities still starkly show us that historically white universities have huge investment funds and have access to these funds to advance their academic program. And therefore, it is important that we start dealing with these issues of historic debt, and that we find a way for our students to be relieved from not having this perpetual issue of this difficult situation that they're faced with. And I want to ask the public protector, as we look to the National Development Plan for 2030, and these huge numbers that we want to fill for higher education, that we see that we cannot at this rate absorb our students. And to simply say that we must move online is not a solution. Many of our students live in very deep rural areas. They do not have electricity. So data is irrelevant. Whether they have a security in having a mobile device is completely irrelevant. What are we supposed to say to these students who come often from very rural schools, and many of them are very good, but that are not equipped to deal with this new solution that we're offering to them simply because it seems to make sense and we want to speak about the digital age? We must be realistic, Public Protector, and we must be pragmatic in evaluating what will work to transform our society. Now we see that the private higher education sector is growing, Public Protector, and this is not a bad thing, but it is showing us that our students are turning, and we see that almost between 18 and 20% of our higher education student population now come from the private sector providers. This means that we're not able to cater for them. And this is in this day and age, whether there is subsidies available to assist private providers at preset rates, or whether it is that we broaden different access models. We need to interrogate these things pragmatically so that we don't have this compounded and escalated issue of inequality that we perpetuate within our system. And Public Protector, I just want to say that, please, that we need to see higher education as an investment. That is not something that we need to reprioritize funds for. This is not something that we need to start looking at as if we are doing something wrong in investing in the higher education sector. We know globally, and we know from myriads of empirical studies, that it cannot be right that the NRF's budget is being cut. It's also not right that we look at NSFAS and look at them at the panacea and blame them for everything because funds are being cut. But we can't cut 30% of the National Research Foundation's budget for postgraduate studies, because where are we looking at as a society? This is where we need to grow, not to detract. For the first time, we've seen that that government spending is higher in the current financial year than the private sector, which means that research is being taken offshore, and we need to build this capacity within our system to ensure that as an economy we can grow. Chairperson and the Public Protector, we need to find this additional funding. We need to find, if we look at the Garrett study, we need to find this extra 20 billion rand so that we can expand and bring security to our TVET and our university students. I want to ask Public Protector that as we look, and NSFAS is doing outstanding work, we mustn't detract from that government has spent fivefold from 2014 to 2020 in the investment in higher education. But we need to, Public Protector, find solutions for universities in the debt that is owed to them so that we can expand the academic program and bring stability to the system. And we can speak about the HERA Commission, and we can speak about unsecured income contingency loan, low interest loan, all of these which have very real and very promising prospects. But we cannot afford to leave any deserving student out of the higher education system, and we need to have policy certainty. We need to ensure that our students are able to get their higher education qualifications. If we look at China, they transformed the economy by an upward trajectory by spending 3% of GDP. And we are spending at 0.6 of GDP on higher education. Public Protector, this cannot be right. And we need to have a coherent analysis of the available tax rebates that are available. If we look at section 12H, how the CETA system has expanded and made sense for learnerships and internships, and the private sector are incentivized. And we know with the BBBEE codes that 3% of spend is a mechanism, but it's not a mechanism that is wide enough. We need to critically engage with the systemic issues around the private sector and work with SARS so that we have a pragmatic model that can sustainably fund the money that we require to have the higher education sector excel and bring security. In closing, Public Protector and Chairperson, I just want to say we need these systemic long-term views. We need to be pragmatic. We need to be realistic. And at the end of the day, this all comes down as a society where we ask, is higher education a priority for us, or is it just something that we keep as an extended unemployment scheme? Thank you so much for the opportunity, Public Protector and Chairperson. I'm very grateful that you have allowed Yusuf to add our voice to the discourse.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meyer, and raising very important and very touching points. The issue of the historic debt that continues to be developed, both the students and us as a country. How do we deal with it? That's an important point that you raised. The issue again, once more, of the rural students. How do they access information pertaining to this? As the previous speaker said, they hear about some of the information for the first time when they arrive at universities or at the institutions of higher learning. That's the first time they hear about a thing called the NSFAS. So to what extent do we go out then? Does government go out to educate students, to educate those matriculants about the opportunities that are available to them? And I fully agree with you that you educate one child, you educate the entire community. And I see there's Pikolomzi Kaba, who also agrees with you to say that we need to walk in the ethos of educate a child to educate the nation. And that's very, very key to always remember. But thank you very much for your input. Now, this now takes us to our interactive then panel session. If I can see all my panel members back, because I've got questions from them coming from our viewers, our listeners, and everybody. And I'm going to request my panelists to be as brief as possible when they respond to the questions so that we can go through all the questions. We at least have more or less an hour to still interact with our people on the platform. So you can continue to send those questions to the panelists and they will respond to them. I think the first question was meant for, where's my first question now? But the first question was for the Public Protector. Public Protector, the question to you. Let me go into my Q&A. What is the Public Protector doing regarding the students who use NSFAS, meanwhile they are well off and their parents earn adequately to pay for their higher education? Because this is also an act of, this is an act of hindrance to the poor students who really need funding and qualify for NSFAS. So Public Protector, can you respond to that question? We'll start with you as brief as possible. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
I think NSFAS is very critical in responding to this because we will have to be then told about your model or the model you are utilizing to assess the compliance or who qualifies for funding, and as well which other institutions you are working with to make sure that we don't have students who can afford the fees and their parents can afford, whereas they have been granted funding. And as well, once that investigation is, or there's that proof, and then NSFAS will indicate what do they do about that. Thank you.
Okay, can I abuse you, ma'am, and ask you another question? My second question to yourself, Public Protector, is based on what has been discovered at this stage, and what would be your call to organs of state that have a role to play in ensuring that a right to education is realized and protected at all times?
Indeed, I thought you will ask a lot of those questions to specialists like Dr. Linda Meyer and them. But I think the very critical issue is we have the Constitution. We are a constitutional state, and as the Professor Majola has indicated, the state or government should be making sure that they create an enabling environment for this investment in education to succeed. And I would say, as you indicated as well earlier, that surely Treasury was going to play a very critical role in this aspect, because if we also have them to understand and how education is funded and the resources which are there and made available to the Department of Higher Education, but also to the basic education department. But also, I think what has been mentioned, especially Dr. Linda, when we are saying we shouldn't be treating the issue of availing the funds and how people should apply and the information as if South Africa is a country where everyone is equal. I think always we should know that it is an unequal country. Inequality is very rife, unemployment, poverty, and as well rural, in fact, students who can't even afford to even apply online, firstly, and as well there are issues of the issue of electricity, issues of data, issues of the very same gadgets. I think whatever solution which government proposes or finds, that solution should be well consulted on. And I think if you've got unions like SAUS, I don't know how often they interact, and as well get the views of the students as government and in your planning. So that will be very, very critical. Thanks.
Thank you, PP, for that input. My next question is to Mr. Nongoko. Mr. Nongoko, I know in your presentation you mentioned that you're only funding the first degree or the first qualification, but there's a question here from Paul Bambo, who wants to know that some students were not funded at undergraduate level, but later on would need funding for their honors or master's degrees. Can these students be granted funding on grounds that they have not used the funding before? Mr. Nongongo?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I think maybe I'll try and be short. I generally want to answer questions in a long about way, but as I indicated, NSFAS is supposed to provide access to education to those that are from poor backgrounds. And as such, it can only afford to give people or fund people for the first qualification. Earlier, when I spoke to the N+ rule, I indicated that the view of government is that even when you've not been funded before, we count the number of years you've been in the higher education system. Again, this is from the perspective that government, even when you are paying for your own fees, government has been subsidizing you through the subsidies that it gives to institutions. And as such, we then cannot fund postgraduate qualifications or people who have decided that perhaps the path they followed is the wrong path. Now they are trying to come to a different qualification, simply because of really the fiscus cannot be able to handle such. Thank you.
Okay. My next question to you. You know, every year, the beginning of the year, we know there's going to be tires burning and there's a lot of chaos somewhere because NSFAS has not provided the necessary funding, people can't register. Now, given all the issues that were raised here as well by the different panel members, in your view, what needs to be done to ensure that this matter is completely dealt with and next year we don't find again at the beginning of the year challenges that we experienced this year, where somebody had to lose their lives before actually NSFAS can do the right thing. What needs to be done once and for all to kill this matter?
Thank you, Chair. Once again, I think I maybe need to say this, that, you know, whenever there is a student protest, the inclination is to say it's linked to NSFAS. In the main, just for context, at the beginning of the year, the students that were protesting in the main were who we call the missing middle, because they were not provided for. They could not register because they had not paid their fees, and they were required to pay minimum amounts to access institutions. Of course, it is not to say that there are no issues at NSFAS, but I think to avoid the problem, precisely the work that we are doing through the ministerial task team to look at what are the funding modalities that can be in place. Also to look at what do we do with the question of the missing middle. Should it be that there's other alternatives? I mean, it's one thing to say those that do not qualify for NSFAS that are below or above the threshold. The question is, are there avenues, for example, and I'm not suggesting that it should be this way, are there avenues for them to even access funding, either through loans, either through other funders, you know? So that's really in the main issue around the issue of the missing middle and the funding constraints that need to be done. Of course, from an NSFAS perspective, ours for the cohort of students that are within our threshold, it is to then make sure that we make funding decisions as early as possible. And in fact, I think the point that Lucanio raised around the fact that sometimes students are not aware of the fact that there's NSFAS out there that can assist them. Ours is to make sure that we then increase our efforts in making sure that students are aware that there's NSFAS, that perhaps we find other mechanisms to assist students once they are in there. Of course, that is all subject to budget constraints. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nangoko, for that. My next question is to Mr. Daweti. I hope you're still there with us. There's a question to you, sir. The question is from Bonginkosi Krai, who wants to know where was SAUS when the BLASC, along with the EFF Student Command, took the minister and UNISA to court? Why were they silent when the minister excluded 20,000 students from being enrolled at UNISA? Many students don't even know they exist. We only know they exist during such platforms. If they truly represent students as they claim, why is it that they are not establishing offices in institutions of higher learning so that students can have access to this, to this union, which is said to be representing them?
May I answer, Chair?
Yes.
If I may, allow me, Chair, to say, firstly, people who are opportunistic are dangerous to the student movement and the youth in general. Instead of advancing the interest of the general student populace, they want to advance their self and narrow interest. I must state on record so that it is recorded that it is not correct or true to say that SAUS was silent on the issue of UNISA. In fact, Dr. Linwin can attest to this. We were the first one to write to the Minister of Education around this matter.
Okay.
Just because BLA took DHET to court and EFF, it does not make them the superior leaders within the sector, because what we were doing, we did not take the DHET to court, but we were engaging on the matter internally, because we were trying to raise a principled argument to say, how can you accept students and then later you want to tell them that they no longer have spaces to study? So to us, to go to court, it was the last resort. And as far as we're concerned, through our engagement, we were reaching consensus with the DHET, because UNISA on the other side was saying, we have received the letter of instruction from the minister. We're prepared to reverse what we have communicated to students, but Let's get buy-in from the minister's office. So to say that we were silent, I want to state categorically that that is not correct. That is not true. SAWS has been there, and even UNISA National SRC can attest to that, that we were the first one to deal with the matter. So just because we did not apply or to take the matter to the court, it does not make us to be the people that never attended to the matter. In fact, I must state it that if the person that has raised this question does not know us, it's unfortunate. To us, that's shocking, because wherever we enter in all institutions of higher learning nationally, we are known by students. Whenever we do our things on the online page of our Facebook, whenever we're going to meet SRCs, we are all known. We are known across the country. So to suggest that SAWS is nowhere to be found, is silent on the student matters, I found it to be very flawed, and perhaps to be a statement that must not be entertained. Thank you very much.
So you're basically saying you do have presence in all the institutions of higher learning? You do have presence?
I'm 100% sure about that, Chair, and I'm prepared to perhaps to know maybe the person who asked that question, in which campus is he or she coming from, where we are not known, so that we can bring a proof to that person that, look, your leadership on this campus, not only your leadership, but the student structures on this campus, they are very well aware of SAWS and its work that is doing in the sector.
Okay, thank you for that response. Dr. Mayor, can we go back to you? You know, you fundraising to fund the students, primarily the students from poor communities. And during your fundraising activities, what are the funders' main concern around tertiary education, and what do you believe should be done to resolve that?
So I think that what the funders are very unsettled by, Chairperson and Public Protector, is this volatility that we are living in the higher education sector. So our funders want to find a solution for missing middle students. They want to have security around students completing their academic year, because they need the graduates. They need the graduates to employ them in their organizations. And this perpetual, you know, I know that when the higher education minister said that it was a saga that unfolded every year, but it is a saga that unfolds, because the problem that we sit with is, how do we find the 20 billion rand to fund the missing middle students so that we can get on with the academic year? So we find that funders are very willing to assist us in funding missing middle students. But as I always say, no funder is altruistic alone in their motives. So unless there are incentives, unless there are tax rebates that they can access, it becomes very difficult for us to secure this funding. And Public Protector, this is why I earlier in my insert asked that when you do this analysis of the security of the higher education sector and how we have the sustainability, that we reevaluate all the policy and legislative frameworks to ensure that there's optimal harnessing, so that people are incentivized, not only for learnerships and internships, but incentivized to support the higher education sector, so that we can bring security for missing middle students into the sector. CEO, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I think it does, ma'am. Mr. Nongogo, back to you. I have a question to NSFAS, Mr. Nongogo. The question is from Tsepo Mahlobokwane, asking what motivated NSFAS to implement the NSFAS N+ rule, because this rule was implemented retrospectively. As such, it prejudiced students, as some were defunded in the middle of their studies, irrespective of whether they pass outstandingly. Mr. Nongogo.
Thank you, Chair. So the N+ rule, maybe just to explain it, is a rule that says you have one extra year for N+1 to complete your studies. If, for example, you are studying a 3-year degree, you are given up to 4 years to complete that degree. As indicated in my earlier introduction, that Of course, this rule was put in place at the time when NSFAS was a loan scheme. When NSFAS has been a bursary scheme, we have not reviewed how this rule works, because we know that all bursaries really look at progression. So you are supposed to get a minimum certain number of, for many bursaries, you're supposed to get certain symbols, you're supposed to pass X number of courses to be considered, because the whole point of a bursary scheme is that no one should hog a spot for anyone to who can perform, who is not performing. So in other words, for students, just to answer this question, if a student was a performing student, how is it that they will then get to exceed the number of years they have been funded? But the whole point of it was to manage the fact that the institution does not have the funds to perpetually fund a student who's not leaving the system. Thank you.
Okay, a follow-up then to that. How then, what is your plan then around the students who were apparently, the LLB students who were defunded this year? What is the plan around those? Are they supposed to abandon their studies, or is there a plan to support them to make sure that they complete their studies?
Thank you, Chair. So maybe the defunding, as we call it, of the LLB student is not linked in a way to the N+ rule, but it was more linked to the fact that, one, NSFAS funds first qualifications. However, as I indicated earlier as well, that because most institutions, this is where this issue of defunding LLB, NSFAS did not fund LLB. However, there are institutions that offer LLB in a way that you can study a particular undergraduate qualification, and then you are given credits to then take LLB as a postgraduate qualification. Because the determination was made that there would not be enough funds to fund postgraduate qualifications. That's how LLB specifically became unfunded. However, we have yesterday issued a circular to institutions where we are outlining in what circumstances we will fund LLB. Just to maybe paraphrase that circular, we will fund those students that were enrolled that were funded from 2019 that are still in those qualifications, and will be given the necessary minimum requirements to complete those qualifications. So we had to go back and review, because I think part of the issue or the challenge linked to this was the fact that there wasn't adequate notice given to applicants that they can make alternative arrangements. And so in that particular manner, we are now addressing what was communicated earlier through the funding guidelines. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Now, my sort of last question to you is, it seems as earlier on when you presented, you said the lack of integration between the NSFAS processes and the higher learning institutions processes are creating problems. Do you have plans to integrate your systems? Because there's a complaint that the miscommunication between yourselves and the institutions of higher learning might require you to decentralize, because apparently students are sent from pillar to post when they encounter challenges with NSFAS funding. So they can't rely even on your call center, because your call center is in a way inadequate and not really fully functional. So is there a plan to probably deal with the lack of integration between your systems to deal with all the issues of students having to go from one office to the next just to resolve the issues of funding?
Thank you, Chair, once again. So maybe I'll try and just separate a little bit between the issues. Firstly, the issue of integration. As it stands now, we do have data exchange platforms that we have with institutions. Many of the institutions are using this platform, but of course, it's a platform that you kind of upload a file. So if the file that you are uploading is inaccurate, of course, there are going to be issues. Now, part of the new system review we're doing is we want to engage, because most of the institutions, particularly universities, they use the same provider or at least similar system rather that they are using. And so we are working on making sure that we will then integrate directly with those institutions. Of course, that's a matter that we still have to consult on with various institutions, because of course we have to deal with issues of cybersecurity when that happens. And of course, in our plan, when it comes to TVET colleges, we understand that TVET colleges do not necessarily have the capacity to have some of these systems in place. And our plan is to, in our own system, develop a module that will be a registration module for TVET colleges, so that they can use that module to register students. So that is in the plan. Now, coming to, and of course, maybe so that one speaks to specific times, we are busy now with the specifications for the new system that we are building. Following that, we'll then be embarking on consultations with USAF. We'll be embarking on consultations with SAGPO, which is the TVET college principals, to see how best we can engage with, or we can get to integrate. Of course, at a technical level, our ICT team is engaging with the various technical teams that are supporting these institutions through their system to assess the possibility of this. In relation to decentralization, Chairperson, I think it is a call that we are getting that the institution should be decentralized. However, the reason people are calling for the institution to be decentralized, this is why we are linking it to the fact that our call center is ineffective. This is why we are linking to the fact that perhaps there are no answers at an institution level. Now, the first thing that we need to do as an organization is to firstly make sure that the financial aid officers are fully capacitated to understand NSFAS processes. The student leadership that supports students, namely the SRCs, and including SAUs, also have to be fully capacitated so that they understand the process. Also, even as NSFAS, we should embark on campaigns so that students understand what are NSFAS processes, what it is that we can do and not do. Of course, including our call center, the reason why our call center is ineffective, it's because of this underlying issue of our systems that are not able to provide accurate data. Now, when we solve these problems, we are then able to solve the issue of providing real-time information to students. And I indicated in my introduction that the scheme at some point was decentralized. And so what the board has asked us to do of NSFAS is, before we can, one, we must perform a feasibility study on the decentralization, which we will be starting. And secondly, also make sure that there are lessons learned from the time when the scheme was decentralized, because you don't want to respond to a problem by simply providing offices. If those offices are there, they still don't have access to accurate information. It then becomes a futile exercise, you know. We must also not create the same issues that were there before by decentralizing. So in essence, we are doing some work to make sure that whatever we do is informed by proper assessments and proper feasibility studies and lessons learned. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Nangoko. Prof, are you still there with us? Prof, the next question is addressed to you. In your view, considering what happens every year at the beginning of the academic year and what happened earlier on in the year, and given the input by both NSFAS and the Department of Education, would you assess, what is your assessment? Do you believe that enough is being done to address the problem permanently? And what would be your recommendation to the different departments involved in the protection of the right to education? Prof? Prof, are you still there? I see you still there, but we can't hear you. Prof, I think Prof is experiencing challenges probably with connectivity. And Public Protector, may we throw this one at you? What would be your call then? What would you be advising the different stakeholders involved in this process to do, given everything that happens every year and given the input today? Is it sufficient to give everybody comfort that as a country we're dealing with this matter and we will find a permanent solution? Or are there specific recommendations that you would make to both the department as well as the institution of higher learning? And when I say the department, I mean both higher education and basic education.
Thank you, Program Director, for hijacking me. And I think Jola was going to be very, in fact, it was going to be very strategic to answer these questions. And as the Public Protector, we indicated earlier that we have a mandate to investigate, but we also have a mandate to mediate and conciliate in these circumstances. So I think this process, which is the project led by the Deputy Public Protector, will also give us some way forward on this particular matter. We will have to, as I indicated earlier again, government's responsibility is to make sure that they create an enabling environment for this process, or for the students and for the universities, weather management and everyone, to operate in an environment which is conducive and which is ideal. But unfortunately, we are here now, Mr. No is possibly has just recently joined, and he's informing us about legacy systems. Some systems are old and stuff like that. The main issue, which is also frustrating and leading students or anyone to be agitated, which we always try to make sure that or we engage on every time, and is part of the Vision 2023 of the Public Protector, is that state institutions needs to be responsive, because the issue of your systems and your emails not being answered and finding students having to be tossed around, that should be prevented and that should be dealt with speedily. Secondly, I think in finding the solution, and that solution should be addressed as a matter of agency, because we are now 6 months into 2021. And surely we should be ready by now or by September to make sure that we don't have a repetition of what is happening throughout the years. And secondly is the question of making sure that whatever systems or offices which you are utilizing, either it's whether it's centralized, but if it's centralized, let's make sure that indeed, your role as NSFAS is clearly explained to the students, because you'd find that universities as well will refer students to NSFAS. NSFAS will say, no, that challenge of integration. So I think as well, NSFAS is the question of also checking how you can integrate all the systems or utilize the systems of government. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you'd find that a child, okay, others are saying, others are abusing the systems because their parents are affording. On the other hand, you are saying when you do your due diligence, you'll discover that this child has both parents, but one parent has not been declared. I mean, surely, possibly you also have access to Home Affairs, Harness system, banks have that. You have access to that. You also have access to, especially the issue of working closely with the SARS, because that's also where you can pick up whether indeed those parents are earning a certain amount and or they have businesses and stuff like that. So I think it's a question of how do we speedily address these issues. And I think for now, we're still not integrated. But again, as I said, we will have a way forward. One way forward is for us to have a process where we mediate and identify the issues which can be dealt with speedily. But then there would be those issues which we will have to conduct an investigation and make sure that we come up with recommendations. And those recommendations will be recommendations which would be implementable, which will be a process where we all work together to resolve these issues, because I think now we can't have the same situation in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Public Protector, for that detailed response. You're spot on. I caught you off guard, but you were able to really give us what I was hoping you would give us. And I also want to catch Dr. Mayer. I want to catch you off guard as well. You seem to have a problem earlier on when you presented about the fact that there's a cutoff that says if you earn 320 or 350,000 per annum, if you earn above that, you do not qualify, your child does not qualify for NSFAS. But the question that the Public Protector addressed, I also want to pose it to you in terms of what do you believe then we should do? What checks and balances probably should be in place to determine whether this child has a father who's maintaining them and all that? And if so, how then, what then needs to be done? Because it's an issue of a moral responsibility towards the fathers to make sure that they take care of their children. So what do you believe can be done to make sure that we detect those fathers who have a responsibility to take their children to school, but who are not doing that? Dr. Mayer?
Thank you very much. So, Program Director, I think that in response to this, we need to say that when a household has 350,000 or 400,000, what is the after-tax money that that household takes home? So maybe we're speaking about 200,000 Rand. And to put a student through university will cost no less than 100,000 Rand per year. So we need to evaluate what is the realistic element. So secondly, households that earn this amount of money often are not able to secure loans of any nature. And unless government has unsecured or owned loans, so when we say that there must be income contingency loans, it also won't help if government doesn't own these loans. Because what are we going to say? If students can't repay these loans, their families will lose their homes. There are many other things that will happen. Critically, it has to be an income contingency loan. So there must be a minimum threshold of earnings that must be available to students before they start repaying these loans. And we need to have a system. So that is one option that we're putting forward. Another option might be that we know that to fund the missing middle, we need, and this is in the TVET and the university sector, we need in the region of 20 billion Rand. So government needs to either reprioritize that money, and or alternatively, we need to come with this suggested income contingency loan. And if I look at Australia, for example, students, graduates will repay that. But there's also a situation in Australia where students that leave the country have to repay the money before they're able to leave the country. So where we invest, for example, in medical students that skip the country after they've studied, that is prevented because we ensure that the resource of fiscal investment is secured for government and for the sustainable longevity of a bursary scheme. So when we speak about fathers that are not investing in their children's education or mothers that are not investing in their children's education, this is a reality and we understand that. And we understand that there's an obligation for higher education payments and there are some students that have sued their parents in terms of getting that. But is this really the system that we want? Is this a system where we want to say, you're earning 200,000 Rand a year in take home. We want you to take 100,000 Rand to put a child through university. How you eat, how you pay rent, how you pay for your other children that are in school is not a consideration. So we can't have this fragmented approach. We need to have a very pragmatic approach to understand what does it mean to earn this amount of money. You know, for many of us, 350,000 Rand might not seem like a lot of money. But for somebody that's got 4 or 5 children that they need to put through school, that they need to pay accommodation for. This is an insurmountable challenge that is faced by them. And I read many of the stories when we get bursaries for students, how that small thing in making that qualification accessible has changed that student's life. So this is not something that I'm speaking about from a distance. This is something that we experience daily. And when we look at our students that are on campus, this is not something that people are lazy and they just want to access money. They really, in most instances, from our experience, have no other option available to them. And what is the option? The option is if they are not poor enough, they can't get higher education. And if they're in the missing middle, they're trapped because their parents can't get loans that are unsecured. So Program Director, this is a very complex and a very difficult discussion that we have. But we mustn't just also go on the side of people are lazy and people don't want to pay for education, because everybody knows that the only way out of poverty is to get a qualification so that you can get yourself out of that poverty cycle. Thank you. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Though I tried to catch you off guard, but you were just spot on. It is a very complex discussion that we're engaging on, and I hope that we will have an engagement again in the future just to try and sort out some of the issues, unpack some of the topics that are so difficult to unpack for most of the people, and then to probably also provide that input to government in terms of what we want to recommend that we believe can improve the situation. And I want to take this opportunity once more to thank my panelists for sharing their information, for their participation, for being responsive to the questions that were posed by our participants. And at this moment, I'm going to hand over to the Deputy Public Protector, Advocate Koleka Gcaleka, to give us a summary and the way forward of the proceedings of today. DPP, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Facilitator. I'd like to take this opportunity to pass my greetings to the Public Protector, Advocate Mkhwebane, the Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, Professor Majola, in absentia, Dr. Thandi Levin from the Department of Higher Education, Dr. Linda Meyer, and to the SANS leadership, Mr. Lukhanyo Daweti, and to the CEO of NFSIS, Mr. Andile Mangoko, and to all participants present here today. Mine really is to summarize and give a way forward of the most insightful and critical deliberations that we had here today. As I go on board, let me thank the Public Protector really for having this vision. This is a continuation of last year Youth Month webinar which the Public Protector had, and it was really focused on access to higher education and its funding, and it was prompted by the students of UNISA. And I would also like to thank them really for the bravery to start this discussion. It is out of that webinar that we as an institution went out then to the institutions of higher learning, engaging with the students, engaging with the university management, with the Minister of Higher Education and his team, and with the students as well as with NFSIS. I think without those having been brought out and PP's vision and drive to ensure that the issues of students in the institutions of higher learning are resolved, we wouldn't be having this webinar. And we really see this webinar, PP, as a ground pillar for the mediation process that we are going to embark on, which PP has really touched on. And it's really assisting us because now it's at least giving us a broader perspective together with the visits that we've embarked on how do we phase the mediation process, what are the short-term interventions and what are the medium to long-term interventions to look into. And as well, our partnership with the Human Rights Commission, Professor Majola, has really been insightful, because this is a constitutional mandate also to the Human Rights Commission, access to education, and ensuring that in terms of Section 29 of the Bill of Rights of our Constitution. Professor Majola has so articulately touched on the white paper on the post-school education to meet the country's needs, especially on the growth of students' access to higher education, free education for the poor, and also looking into issues of funding of historically disadvantaged institutions. And this issue, Program Director NPP, has come out a lot in our engagements with students, as well as with institutions of higher learning. Dr. Lewin, you know, the issue of the funding model, I mean, that was the critical issue that we discussed when we met with the Minister of Higher Education, and he had promised us access to the document once it has been presented to Cabinet. And we are really hoping, PP, that we would also be able to have a look at it and make input. And also what critically came out was that there are previous reports which had been put together, and really if government had at least attempted to implement some of those reports, and which are, one of them is the report by the Human Rights Commission, the Heifer Commission, towards the transformation of the higher education system, I really think we wouldn't be as backward as we are today. But we really hope that some of those recommendations are going to be incorporated, because they do remain relevant. Evidence of NSFAS recipients doing well. What I want to link actually is this phrase from Dr. Lewin and the issue of what Mr. Nongoko had raised of funding academically deserving students, and that those who do not perform well are then excluded by the system. And I think one conversation that we had informally with Mr. Nongoko was, don't we think that some of the protests that are taking place, the university environment, are also conditions for non-performance of the students, and ultimately result in their exclusion, but also their socioeconomic backgrounds, and also together with what they become subjected to when they start university? And how do we ensure that those traumas do not impact on the students' performance? SALS raised the issue of mental health within the higher education system. And I think it's commendable that SALS is looking into that issue, but I believe it requires a more integrated program and focus specifically on the first-year students, on the students that come from poor backgrounds, because they come with so much baggage. Having gone to the University of Venda, where the Vice Chancellor even shared with us that some of these students are actually supporting their families with this money that NSFAS is providing, because where they come from home, there's basically nothing. Now, with those conditions, how do you expect the child to then get to the gates of higher learning? And as PP has said, there are tires burning, there's blockages. And this is the institution that they actually see as a gateway to liberation. There's a gateway to the freedom of their families. That's the gateway to alleviating poverty. And those become the same gates that are preventative. And we still expect them to be in a good mental state to then a month later focus on their studies and be able to produce results that ensure that they are not excluded the following year for academic reasons. So having touched on that, Dr. Lewin also touched on the issue of the missing middle, and I think Professor Mayer as well passionately dealt with that particular issue. It is indeed, Mr. Nongoko, as you have said, the major issue why students are protesting from our observations and what has been reported to us. And indeed, the correct question to ask is really, a parent who earns 200,000, having to pay for transportation to get to work, having to pay for shelter and all of that, must be able to save over 100,000 for the funding of that student. And these are the critical questions which I hope that government will be asking itself as it finalizes the funding model and be able to ensure that they are able to present a funding model which is fair and equitable, considering our socioeconomic demographics as a country. Yes, we do need a sustainable policy, but I think what has come out very strongly, linked to Dr. Levin's issue of the sustainable policy, is that policies become one-sided. There's no consultation to policies that are being taken. Even the university management have expressed how unfeasible some of these policies are. And then you then wonder that this is the same government. The universities are a creature of statute, which is formed by government and parliament, but yet the policies are not feasible for them to be able to enhance learning within their institutions. So, and I think PP has also touched on the issues of integration within the higher education system. And I'm later going to speak on who must integrate from what we have picked up thus far. CEO of NFSS, I must say, PP, from where we started off last year and what the CEO is presenting today, I must really say that it seems like he has hit the ground running. He's identified what are the key systemic gaps, and that's what is very, very important, so that you are able to then have suitable and sustainable solutions. And thank you for that, CEO. And with the engagements that we are having with you so far, it really shows one, the cooperation. NFSS PP does join us when we go around the institutions of higher learning, and I've picked up a remarkable improvement in the type of responses that they are providing to the grievances that are being put forward by the students. So it does at least show a machinery where it's now being starting to be oiled, as opposed to the time where we have started off. But of course, there are critical policy issues which affect NFSS as well, which NFSS cannot respond to when the students ask to them. Now it goes back to the issue of integration. When higher education develops the policy, how do they integrate with NFSS? Is this feasible? How are you going to implement this policy? One of those is the issue of the rollout of the laptops, which has also become an issue for the protests, Mr. Nongoko, where really between policy and implementation of that, there's quite a critical gap aspect there, which has caused students and university management, by the way, to be unhappy about that issue. And it's a pity that higher education didn't leave anyone here, because it is really one of those short-term issues that needs to be rectified, especially now we are on lockdown again, we're going back onto online. Most of the students cannot access, actually all the students cannot access all the online e-learning material on these laptops. They do not have the relevant capacity. And Professor Mayer, as you so passionately say, you know, it is not just the issue of electricity in these rural areas. In areas where there is electricity, there's just no signal. So what is the relationship with the Department of Communications in respect of that? There's just no signal in these areas. So even if these students have the modem, they've got the laptop to connect, they've got the electricity, but there's just no signal. I'm going to give an example about me, who comes from the green hills of Umzimkhulu. When I'm home, I struggle with signal. You know, I can't even join virtual meetings. I struggle. I have to go and stand up the hill or up the mountain to be able to join. Now Can you imagine a student who must then study the whole day or attend classes the whole day, and there is just no signal, yet they do have the tools. So there are other aspects that there needs to be integration on in respect of these particular issues. And the issues of the policies on which courses to exclude and at which particular period, it has become very evident that there is a lack of consultation and communication and prior planning, PP, in respect of these issues. Because if government knows that they are going to bring an end to a particular course because it is irrelevant, not employable, and so forth, those are supposed to be issues that have been projected, you know, and how do we ensure that we assist government to be able to project into these particular issues? There's a critical question that you asked, Mr. Nongoko, on does NSFAS deal with the social issues which result in most of these children actually or young adults becoming what you must take care of. Now, the public protector has actually approved a systemic investigation into the maintenance system in the Department of Justice, and NFCIS PP has approached us, you know, on the debate on this issue, because as PP correctly says, NFCIS should be able to tap into the system of SARS, should be able to tap into DOJ, into Home Affairs, but unfortunately, there are hindrances in respect of those issues. Now, part of what we hope to achieve also through this systemic investigation is to ensure that we ensure integrated and interdependent government systems, because at the end of the day, the weight is on government's shoulder. It doesn't matter which department. We've got one fiscus as the state, but the way the state is disintegrated, you would swear that each department has its own fiscus, you know? Each one is just throwing their hands and say, it's not my responsibility. But also you realize that it means that we're a little bit behind or lacking in respect of thought leadership as a country, which as a development state, we should actually be on par with, because from the birth of the child, it is critical that both parents be registered. Home Affairs must know who are the parents of these children. SARS must be able to trace what are these parents of these children's economic activity is and how do they contribute into our economy, so that maintenance department from the Department of Justice is able to tap into it and say, this is a child whose father is affording. NFCIS, SASSA is able to say, yes, the mother can't afford, but the SARS system is saying the father of this child contributes so much. This is the earning. Home Affairs system is telling us that, so that through maintenance and justice, that child can be supported and it alleviates the burden of the fiscus. That is the level at which we should be getting things. And PP, thank you for approving this, because we are really hoping that that is part of how it is going to assist, but it is also going to assist to then address your issue, Mr. Nongoko. And yes, in our view, NFCIS is actually part of the custodians of the social ills of our society. Otherwise, we wouldn't have NFCIS. And these are the children who either come from pure poverty, but some of them, it's those whose parents are falling by the crack, you know, and those are the issues that needs to be addressed. And also dealing with the leaks, and these are part of the fiscus leaks, because this is money that's supposed to be in the fiscus, and now it is paying for the child who is not being supported by one of the parents. Expiring qualification and so forth, and I've said this before, with proper planning, this should be able to be resolved, because higher education would know, the institution would know, there'll be communication with NFCIS. So that's the most critical part, to ensure that all the stakeholders are on board and they are able to integrate their systems. I'm encouraged, PP, that the board is looking at the issue of decentralization of NFCIS. study there, because indeed, I've actually tried the call center myself when I was in one institution, and it went unanswered over time. And I wondered, poor students who go to borrow a telephone line maybe are not able to get through. The internet, no responses come through. They've actually showed us it's not feasible. But also, human psychology has proven that where there's no human contact, response becomes a problem. And I know that we are moving towards the 4IR, but it can't be drastic. Human resources needs to be trained towards this, where they don't have a feel and a sight of the challenges that their customers are going through. The response is not as energetic as it's supposed to be. So it does create a particular challenge. So I really hope that indeed, CEO, as you are looking into your systems and doing this feasibility study, that human touch is always important. And one university vice chancellor said, PP, the other time, they sometimes feel that NFSIS deals with numbers, and they forget that behind these numbers is blood, sweat, and tears of human beings. And if they just see numbers through the system, that compassion that comes with doing your work sometimes become absent in dealing with that. SAUS PP has submitted a comprehensive complaint to us, and their complaint is actually covered by all the feedback that we are getting as we are going into campuses. And we are really looking forward to working with the SAUS leadership, but also where there's concern that the SAUS leadership is not in touch, as raised here today, we are engaging with the individual SRCs in the universities. Yes, PP, we have not gone to all the universities, but we will also be putting out a public call for SRCs and students to come forward with additional issues other than those that we would have captured. In provinces where I've been unable to go physically, our provincial representatives who are our public protectors in those provinces will be going out to those universities. But we've tried much as possible to go out, especially to the historically disadvantaged provinces, because we too, people, don't want to just deal with paper of the complaint and the number. We want to have that feel so that we know exactly what is happening on the ground. And when we engage on these issues, we engage from a position of knowing the know-hows, and not from a position of privilege, because sometimes if I'm just sitting in Pretoria, PP is in Pretoria, we're really in positions of privilege. We do not know what these students are actually going to. And that is what we've also been saying, PP, to NFSIS in most instances. When they respond to questions, you would realize that they are responding from a position of privilege because they do not know what those students are going to. What has come out critically from the complaints by SAUS and the students, which I'm going to add on this issue, is the issues of the laptops. But Mr. Nongoko, you've spoken about the issue of cybersecurity. There's a huge feeling that NFSIS needs to do some awareness on the issues of cyber awareness on cybersecurity and crimes, because most of the students actually are being defrauded. And it is very clear that it comes from within the system, because where would they get the details of the students who have received, who are receiving allowances? And they would get SMSs like your PIN, provide your PIN and all of that. NFSIS employee responded by saying, but how do these students think FNB would have a Gmail address? And I'm like, I can just imagine a student from Umzimkhulu, where I come from. How do they even know the FNB email address? You know, it is really responding or dealing with issues from a position of privilege. But that kind of awareness is critical, because a lot of students are being defrauded and they end up not being able to have access to their allowances. Professor Linda Meyer, I think your inputs were spot on. Your inputs were spot on. they're dealing with the socioeconomic and political factors that are facing our country and thus affecting the poorest of the poor people. And we really hope to engage with you, by the way, before we finalize our report, which our PP is intending for us to do, to really get your inputs on this issue. And how do we ensure equitable funding of higher institutions? I mean, I didn't know that even from the government funding PP, the institutions are not funded equitably. You know, the previously disadvantaged institutions are still suffering, like Univenda is getting less than what the other institutions, which are, by the way, more fortunate institutions. But what is also critical, PP, which was brought by the students of UNISA before us, is the issue of not equitable funding by NFSIS for the students. And maybe NFSIS must give us a way forward of this. When you change policy and expand, logic dictates that must happen in all the sectors. But that is not the case. UNISA students don't have the same funding as students at universities. TVET college students don't have the same funding. So it means that a student at WITS, who ordinarily is at least not as disadvantaged as a student who goes to a TVET college, is further advantaged by the system because they receive more funding in any event. You know, so those are the kind of things that really need to be looked into so that we do not perpetuate poverty. Because indeed, Professor Mayor, education is the key to success. It remains the key to success for us as a country. And indeed, for a developing country, a third world country, our projection should be that we are investing more into education so that we know that in 5 years to come, those students are entering the labor market. They are able to alleviate poverty in their families, but they are able to take care of their offsprings, and their offsprings do not become a burden of the state. And I think this is really how the state needs to look into this. So I've touched on thought leadership, I've touched on integrity. What's also important is the integrity of the systems, PP, because with the mismanagement of funds and maladministration, which is publicly reported at NFSIS, it is the cause of one of the reasons that NFSIS cannot fund a larger number of students. So PP, I think it's critical that we write to the Minister of Education, and he had promised us, by the way, in our meeting, and actually requested this report now that it's out, because it is part of our investigation. We just said we will not start the wheel from scratch. If there's a base, let us get that base and move from there. But it is critical that higher education and NFSIS moves from the point of the issues that would have been raised by that interministerial task team in dealing with the issues of maladministration and misappropriation of funds within NFSIS, because it is part of the root causes why we are where we are as the country. If we would reduce corruption, we would deliver better services as a country. Issues of accommodation and payment of allowances, which is outsourced to third parties, it becomes a challenge because payments are not made on time. And sometimes, yes, it is not NFS's fault, but the money goes into a third party, the third party pays to them. But why? This is a continuous service. It is not a service that's going to change tomorrow. Why isn't there a system to allow for this the abuse of children at these accommodations and the corruption that is formed around these accommodations? This really requires that government resolves this issue. And PP, lastly, the issue of the involvement of the Department of Public Service and Administration. I know their response to us has been that it is not their problem, but we are going to be persistent, PP, because we do feel that it is their problem. The withholding of graduates' certificates by university management, which is understandable because they want to get their money back. They are running a business. But what they didn't know as we were engaging with them is that you are actually preventing yourself from getting your money back, because the DPSA regulations is that when you apply for a position, you must provide your qualification. Now, that former student is unable to provide their qualification, therefore they fall into this crack of unemployment and they're unable to pay back into NSFAS. But that requires a collective. How does DPSA deal with these issues? University management, issues of the historic debt, all those involved, to ensure that this, and government is the largest employer. We cannot run away from that. So from a government perspective, that is an issue that we need to deal with, and we need to deal with it with the urgency that it deserves. With that said, PP, just on the way forward, really, at this stage, we have completed accumulating the information. We're ready to start the mediation process, and this platform has given us a very good foundation for that. So parties involved, and we've already written to them to respond to the allegations, which they have all done. So we will now serve the short-term, medium, and long-term. However, PP, we've already started dealing with some of the short-term issues, because as we do these university engagements, immediately we then say the team is going to remain. There will be continuous virtual meetings to resolve these short-term issues. And many of them have actually been resolved, but yes, there are those which remain unresolved. With that said, as the Public Protector has mentioned in her opening address, what we want to achieve as Public Protector South Africa is to achieve a strengthened democracy, a democracy where its children are not protesting for their rights in the manner in which their forefathers had done. Their forefathers did that, they protested, and they did what they had to do to attain this democracy. Now, this democracy must become, its fruits must be enjoyed by their children, and the gates of higher learning must really be open to all who are eligible to accessing the institutions of higher learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Public Protector, for that summary. You really well summarized all the discussions here, and we know now how to take the process forward as the Public Protector South Africa. But at the moment, I just want to thank all the participants. First, thank the organizers of this session, because it was a very valuable session. So we thank you, the support staff, for organizing this, but we also want to thank all the other participants and thank our esteemed panelists for your preparations and your contribution in this session. And thank you, DPP, for summarizing the events of the day. And at that, we want to say thank you and goodbye, and may continue to be safe. Please remember to wear your masks all the time, sanitize, and make sure that you do not get yourself involved in crowded spaces, and do social distance even at home. Thank you very much. Have a good day further.